I would now like to introduce John Cassells, founder of Men Ending Trafficking. John is a human trafficking specialist with serving in Mission, Canada. He works closely with some of the country's leading advocates and was called to Ottawa in 2014 to advise the federal government on Bill C-36 prostitution legislation. The Ontario government also consulted John on their 2016 provincial strategy to address human trafficking. In 2015, he founded the program Men Ending Trafficking, followed by Parents Hope in 2016 for families impacted by human trafficking. After 3 decades on the front line, John continues to work directly with trafficked young people throughout the GTA. The floor is now yours, John.
We've been learning this evening about sex trafficking, what it is. I'd like to spend the majority of my time with you talking about how I believe we can see an end to it. I worked with a girl named Katie and became acquainted with 3 of her girlfriends, all 15 years old. One afternoon, the 3 friends walked Katie to a park not far from the place where they usually hung out together. And once behind bushes and secluded from view, they began to savagely beat Katie. It was horrific, and she fell on the ground. And that's when the kicking started. And she was bleeding. Her clothes were being torn. And then they stopped. They helped her to her feet. They walked her out of the park and to a nearby house. They ordered her to take a shower, and they laundered the blood out of her clothing. After that, it was as if nothing had happened. They were friends. I learned of the incident a few days after it happened, and I asked about it, but I got nothing. I knew the 4 were involved in prostitution, and I had suspected that possibly they even have the same pimp, the same trafficker. But I didn't even know who that was. A year later, out of the blue, the pimp came to me. The pimp gave a confession of human trafficking, and I found out that Katie's beating was a direct consequence of her refusing to service a client. While the trafficker wasn't there in the park, that's where the order came from to beat Katie. This story depicts human trafficking because force was used to take advantage of the kids for profit. You can't always tell who is going to be a human trafficker. The person who trafficked Katie and her friends was a 16-year-old girl from their school. Sex trafficking is a crime that has become a very large issue in Canada. And communities like Ajax seem to be on the leading edge of that growth. So how do we stop it? Some are most concerned with rescuing the victims. It's a good thing when we help exploited people get away from their abusers. It's not actually a top priority for me, and I'll tell you why. Suppose you run a coffee shop and business is really booming, and then one day without notice, one of your best workers quits and is just gone. Does that mean there will be one less coffee barista in Ajax? Well, not for long. As long as there are paying customers, you'll hire a replacement to keep the coffee flowing and your customers returning. It's the same for those who run prostitution businesses. As long as there are paying customers, traffickers will simply recruit another victim. How easy is it to lure another victim? With the promise of gifts and glamour and love. Procuring a new recruit can be as easy as shooting fish in a barrel. If something happens to a pimp's money maker, he'll just go get a fresh one. So helping girls leave exploitation is a very, very good thing, and I commend the organizations that do it. If our goal is to end human trafficking, our net gain is zero because another victim just gets lured in. We'll have saved no one. Some say the key is educating potential victims. Sex trafficking awareness presentations with grade 8, grade 9 students have become commonplace in schools throughout the GTA. It's hard to say how much this awareness helps in the short term because there is no apparent decrease in human trafficking rates. Young people have never been more knowledgeable about what happens in the sex trade, and in fact, they have never been more open to getting involved with it. Many youth view prostitution as a viable option. Even when they enter of their own volition, they have no idea how profoundly damaging it will be and how difficult it will be to avoid being sex trafficked once they enter. Educating kids is very important, very worthwhile, but perhaps the biggest payoff is that these kids will take that knowledge into adulthood and create sustainable change. For they are the community leaders of the future. In recent years, Ontario's policymakers have been encouraging police agencies to go after the pimps, to arrest the human traffickers. This is a very good idea. Not far from here tonight, pimps have a bunch of girls in the hotels along the 401, and they should be held accountable. It's extremely wrong that this should happen in a country like Canada. Police in the GTA have been doing a great job. Here in Durham Region, 6 very dedicated DRPS officers are extremely busy with their cases, and I think we're going to hear a little bit about that tonight. This is very, very important work. A few months ago, I sat in a Durham Region court with a 14-year-old girl who was exploited. The accused trafficker, a man in his 20s, grew up here in Ajax. At the time he was preying on the 14-year-old, he was out on bail awaiting sentencing in another human trafficking case. It appears for him the risk of getting caught was no deterrent at all. Many pimps in this area want to be notorious want to be feared. They aspire to be outlaws in the truest sense of the word. Being in trouble with the law, well, it might not actually be a fun experience for them. It does help them build the street cred that is important to them. Even if they quit what they call the pimping game or go to prison for a very long time, there are way too many others prepared to take their place. Busting pimps is the primary focus of Ontario's strategy to end human trafficking. It's very good to do this. This is a very important part of the puzzle. But as a way of eliminating human trafficking, the program is failing. So what can actually be done to save a girl from sex trafficking? It takes 100 men. Are you following me? Let me put it this way. If enough men will stop buying sex, it will decrease the demand so that one less girl will be lured into the sex industry. So how do we get that done? A recent study by the US-based group Demand Abolition identifies the two most effective ways to stop men from purchasing sexual services. Firstly, the study indicates that about a quarter of sex buyers will actually stop buying sex if they know there's a very realistic chance they'll be caught. Enforcement against sex buyers has not been a main priority in this province for a very long time. We might get an update by the police officers who are in attendance tonight, I'm not sure. The research also found that an even greater impact is possible when people think differently about prostitution. In societies that recognize that the sex industry is inherently harmful to women and children, fewer men purchase sexual services. Before December 6th, 2014, prostitution between consenting adults was legal in Canada. On that day, buying sex became illegal for the first time in Canada, even between consenting adults. The moratorium on buying sex was not a result of some hasty decision by a prudish government, but rather a rigorous study on human sex trafficking and the legal models attempting to deal with it. Academic studies worldwide show that normalizing prostitution increases not just the volume of sex trade activities, but leads to higher rates of underage prostitution, human trafficking, and related sex industry violence. This means tolerating or legalizing or decriminalizing sex industry activities increases violence. So understanding human trafficking is not really that complicated, but it takes 100 men to save a girl from exploitation. So let's keep this conversation going. Let's get behind our police agencies in their efforts to safeguard vulnerable women and children in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was very, it's nice to have a man's perspective up on the stage tonight, and for the work that you're doing to help women and children. So our question for you right now is, John, as a male, what would you say are your responsibilities in ensuring this conversation continues and awareness and education is shared with other men? In addition, how can both men and women get involved in ending human trafficking?
Well, I want to comment. There's a good number of men here tonight, and I appreciate this. I've been to a lot of awareness events where it's almost entirely women. And I think us guys, we initially think, oh my goodness, this is a woman's issue, isn't it? I would feel a little out of place being there. People would wonder where my curiosity about sex trafficking is coming from. And I think we need to get over that and understand we only need to have this conversation because of the way men in this country are behaving. And so that is our message, and that is the motivation behind the organization Men Ending Trafficking. A lot of the presentations that we do actually involve men's groups, men's breakfasts at churches, that sort of thing. And so we speak largely to a male audience, and we in fact involve a lot of men in our program as volunteers. About 40% of our volunteers are female, about 60 are male, and we have a variety of activities. We go into court with young people who are required to testify against their abusers and provide that protective service. So lots of opportunities with the NGOs, the nonprofit groups that are out there, and I encourage you to explore that and see if you can find your place in this fight against human trafficking. Thank you.